Episode 32, My Pre-Owned Car. The purchase of a new car is something that sparks joy and excitement for many. For a young man named Ryan, that excitement was long overdue after saving up for over 2 years working as a barista. Although it was a pre-owned car, it was his first, and the anticipation had him on the edge for weeks. Eventually, the day that he had been waiting for finally came. It was the day for Ryan to collect his car keys, and since he wasn't working that day, Ryan couldn't wait to spend the day driving his car around. After collecting his car, the first thing Ryan wanted to do was to impress his girlfriend with it. So, he immediately went to her place to fetch her. He drove his girlfriend to date spots that he previously couldn't bring her to, as it would have been too much trouble to go to those places using the public transport in the area. Ryan then had a great evening dinner with his girlfriend before eventually sending her back. Afterwards, while Ryan was driving alone, he thought about picking up some snacks at the supermarket before heading home. But as Ryan was driving, he noticed a knocking sound coming from his trunk. At first, Ryan ignored it, but as the sound soon got louder, he couldn't help but had his focus directed towards it. Ryan initially thought about stopping his car for a short while to make check, but he knew that he was about to arrive at the supermarket soon. So he continued driving for another 10 minutes, still with the occasional sounds coming from his trunk. Once Ryan arrived, he parked his car near the entrance of the supermarket. He stepped out of his car and walked over to his trunk to check if there was something that he could have left unsecured that was probably tossing and turning as he was driving. But when Ryan opened his trunk to check, he found out that it was empty. So he checked the tailpipe below it to see if there was anything loose that could have made the sounds. After not seeing anything wrong with it as well, Ryan thought that it was probably wear and tear noises that were coming from the car's old body. So Ryan decided to leave it as that and entered the supermarket to buy his snacks. After grabbing what he wanted, Ryan queued to make his payment. While waiting in the queue, Ryan was staring out to the parking lots when he suddenly noticed what seemed like a little girl, partially hidden behind his car. The sight of the girl caught Ryan's attention, and he tried to look closely at what the girl was trying to do. He then saw the girl skipping around his car, and when she was at the trunk of the car, the little girl turned to look towards Ryan without any expression. As she stood beside the trunk, she leaned her head against it, as though she was resting in an awkward manner while still standing. Afraid that the little girl would cause a scratch to his beloved car, Ryan really wanted to drop out of the queue and walk back to his car. However, as he only had one person in front of him in the queue to make the payment, Ryan continued queuing anxiously. Ryan then saw the little girl stood back straight up and jumped up on the trunk. She sat on the trunk facing backwards and kept bouncing while seated. This was when Ryan became really annoyed at what he was seeing, before he soon realized how strange it was that even though the girl was bouncing up and down vigorously, his car didn't bounce even the slightest bit. The girl got off the trunk shortly after, turned around to look at the trunk, and just stared at it with a sad expression this time. Just in time, it was Ryan's turn to make the payment at the counter. Ryan took his eyes off of the girl very briefly, and as Ryan only bought a few snacks, the transaction was completed swiftly. Ryan picked up his grocery bag, and as he turned away from the counter to walk to his car, he noticed that the little girl was no longer there. In fact, there wasn't anyone there. Ryan's car sat there on its own as the other couple of cars in the parking lots, quite a distance away, were also without their owners. Ryan thought that it was strange, wondering where the girl had come from, and wondered if she was one of the shopper's children. Regardless, Ryan was more concerned about his car being damaged, so all he kept thinking as he walked to his car was if there were any scratches on it. Ryan thought that if there was a scratch, he was going to get so annoyed and would try to search for the little girl. But to his relief, once Ryan was at his car, he did a thorough check and found no scratches or marks on it. He looked around and also no longer saw the girl again. So Ryan put his grocery bag on the front passenger seat before he started his engine and drove off. As Ryan was driving back home on a quiet road with no other cars around, Ryan was initially glad that the sound that came from his trunk earlier was no longer heard. But as he was midway into the journey, Ryan began hearing sounds coming from his car roof. Thinking that it was probably a small tree branch that fell on his car, Ryan ignored the sound. However, the sound was heard again, and now the sound repeated itself a few times. Ryan was now sure it wasn't the sound of a tree. Instead, Ryan began getting nervous as it began to sound like footsteps on his car's roof. Before Ryan could even think about stopping the car, the footsteps sounded as though they were walking to the back of his car. Ryan's first reaction was then to look at the rearview mirror, as he anticipated that whatever that was moving on his car's roof would eventually go to the trunk and can be seen through the rearview mirror. Right when Ryan looked into the mirror, he saw a child coming down from the car roof to the trunk. The child then sat down on the trunk with her back facing Ryan. Although his thought process delayed for a couple of seconds, he soon realized that the girl was the same little girl that he saw from the supermarket. There and then, Ryan's fears started to creep up on him, as he knew immediately that the girl was not actually a human being, and was instead a wandering spirit. And as the road was quiet, Ryan didn't want to stop his car in the middle of nowhere. All Ryan thought about was to drive as fast as he can until he eventually reached the safety of his home and the company of his family members. Ryan tried his best to ignore looking at his rearview mirror again, as he knew that the girl was still on the trunk. But somehow, his curiosity overcame his fears as he eventually gazed into the mirror again. That was when he realized that the girl was now seated cross-legged, facing in his direction. Ryan immediately felt goosebumps on him as he became even more terrified. Ryan then tried to look away again, and as he was slightly shaken from fear, he could see from his peripheral vision that there were movements from the girl as though she was trying to get his attention. As much as he tried, Ryan eventually lost to his curiosity again and looked into the mirror. The girl was now pointing towards the right of the trunk, which lessened Ryan's fears and made him more curious. Ryan then looked ahead, and to his relief, he could already see his house from a distance. All that was on Ryan's mind was to reach his home safely. He finally arrived, parked his car, and avoided any more eye contact with his rearview mirror. Ryan carefully got out of his car, slightly afraid that the girl might still be seated on the car trunk. To Ryan's relief, the girl was no longer there. But as he still clearly recalled what had happened earlier, he walked to his trunk to check. Ryan remembered how the girl repeatedly pointed to the right part of the trunk, as though she was trying to tell him something. So, to bury his overbearing curiosity, Ryan opened the trunk lid again and looked at the part where the little girl pointed to. However, as the trunk was empty, Ryan wondered what it was that the girl was actually pointing at. As Ryan looked closely at the corner of the trunk, that was when he noticed that something sparkled through a very small crack between the car trunk's liner and its base, which could never have been noticed if it wasn't for the girl. Ryan then slightly tore the liner open, shone his phone's flashlight, and saw a necklace caught in between. Thinking that it was probably something about the necklace which made the girl try her best to get Ryan's attention, Ryan pulled the necklace out. And although it was already late, Ryan wanted to clear the matter as soon as possible. So he called his car salesman, who came over not long after. Ryan told his car salesman about what he had experienced earlier, but he could hardly believe it. But the salesman maintained his professionalism and contacted the previous car owner, who came immediately upon knowing about the necklace. Once the car owner and his wife saw the necklace, they immediately recognized it and said that it belonged to their daughter, who had recently passed away from an illness. That was when Ryan knew what actually happened. Ryan concluded that the girl was the previous owner's daughter, and all she wanted was for Ryan to give her favorite necklace back to her parents. After Ryan handed the necklace over to the previous owners, they were very thankful to Ryan and his car dealer for initiating to call them, and ever since that day, Ryan never saw the spirit of the girl ever again. He was glad that he could help the family recover the necklace, and Ryan was also glad that he never had to experience another spirit sitting on the roof or on the trunk of his beloved pre-owned car.